So, a very warm welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. I'm absolutely delighted to be hosting this know-how session today. We've called it the spin-off, and the reason we've called it the spin-off is we're going to be talking about, particularly from a marketing perspective, the implications of taking a great idea, or maybe not even a great idea, outside of, if you like, the mothership, outside of an organization, and setting up anew. And we've got Piers Clark from Owl Utilities with us, and Tim Southern, who's calling in from Toronto. Piers in a car park in Hull. Very interesting and exotic, I must say. I'm not quite as jealous as I usually am with some of the locations which I hear you tuning into. So we're going to be obviously having a Q&A session. If everyone's got any questions they'd like to ask during or towards the end of this session, please just type it into the chat and we'll deal with those as well. Those of you who are new to the know-how sessions, a very warm welcome as well. It's basically an effort on the side of myself and Tom Freyberg, who's also on the call, to keep the community going, particularly the marketing community and everything marketing related in the water sector. And we've been able to have some wonderful guests come in and share their experience and their knowledge on all kinds of marketing aspects over the past few weeks. We've got a few cracking sessions coming up as well, but I'm really excited to get cracking as well with this session. So Piers, the Owl Utilities story is one which I've heard some of. I'm sure I'm going to learn some new things today as well.
I feel.
Let me have an intro question.
Right. You were due to be on the call with William.
I just put whoever's on the phone on mute here. Yeah. It's okay. There we go. So everyone except Piers and Tim should be on mute now. Thames Water is where I think the first germ of the idea originated. Tell me, are they kicking themselves for letting it leave Thames, or are they boasting that it's such a great idea and they came up with it? What's the story there?
So actually, it wasn't Thames. It was. It all relates back to I was the early noughties. I was in W.S. Atkins. I was the managing director of Atkins Water, and it was 2003, 2004, something like that. And I thought it would be good to try and launch a investment fund. In the water sector. Back then, there weren't any venture capitalists acting in water. There were lots of venture capitalists who were doing things in the sort of green space, but water wasn't one of them. And I thought, wouldn't it be fun to set up a small investment fund, 50 million? And I thought, it's easy. We'll go around 10 water companies and get them all to pitch in 5 million. I staggered now at the naivety of my thinking. And actually, we failed. We failed miserably to raise any interest in that fund. And as a sort of harumph at the end of it, I said, well, right, if we can't raise a fund, what we'll do instead is we'll form a deal flow relationship. We'll find deals and we'll take those to investors. And that was what formed TAG. And I remember taking this idea of TAG. But remember, Atkins at the time was still is a very white collar, respected, very intelligent and informed engineering consultancy. And I took to them this idea that we were going to take other people's ideas and help them attract funding for it. And we would act as the intermediary. And my boss, Ivor Cato, who I probably shouldn't have named on this thing. My boss at the time said, but Piers, I don't get it. Surely we're Atkins. We're clever enough. All the ideas should come from us. We're the bright people. And I was actually struck by the sort of corporate arrogance of every good idea must come from us because we're the clever people. And it struck me as this really strange moment. Anyway, as it happens, I was coming to the end of my time period at Atkins and I moved on to Mouchel. I joined Mouchel and TAG was formed. TAG is, for those people who aren't aware, it's a forum where we help water utilities around the world identify and adopt new technology. And it's not our technology, it's technology that comes from all sorts of entrepreneurs anywhere in the world, and we sort of facilitate those introductions. And TAG was born out of a failed plan to generate an idea. ISLE wasn't formed until 5 years later, when Mouchel was beginning to unravel, and I led a management buyout of my part of ISLE. So at the time, I was the managing director of their water and energy division, which employed about 2,500, 3,000 people. And I had these grandiose plans of trying to raise a few $100 million to extract that team out. Again, my life is dictated by massive failure. We failed completely in achieving that. And in fact, the management buyout fell through, and I was not quite sacked, but I was encouraged to leave, because that's what happens when you aren't successful in doing a management buyout. Now, we called, just to finish this little story, the management buyout had been called Project ISLE, because you have to give all mergers and acquisitions a sort of code name. And so we called it Project ISLE. And everyone thought, oh, it's ISLE because it's the water and energy bit being split out as an island. Actually, it was a very childish projectile. It was so that, yeah, projectile. It was, we're escaping, we're getting out of it. We are the projectile out of here. And when the MBO fell apart and died, which, not that the date burnt into my brain, but was the 17th of December 2009, when that deal fell over and I left the company a couple of weeks later, early January 2010, I set up a little consulting business, which was basically just so I could do some consulting, some tax efficient consulting, basically. When I was thinking about what to call it, without a moment's hesitation, I called it ISLE, because Project ISLE was going to live on, and that's how it came from. So I'd love to claim that the whole idea of tag and ISLE and the cleverness of the branding, it is all pure chance and pure luck, I'm afraid.
Well, it's been a great success, and we had Victoria Edwards on 2 weeks ago, who's a good friend of yours, and Ben Tam from ISLE as well, and she was saying, when I get an idea, I'm like a terrier with a bone, and I won't let go. And I'll carry on, and I'll carry on. And it sounds like you've done exactly the same. So that perseverance seems to be great. But obviously, you know, at Atkins, the idea kind of failed, but you still said, no, there's something in this. It's going to work. And then it failed again. But you still
blind optimism and arrogance can see you go a long way.
There you go. Well, you've persevered, and it's been a very successful journey up to now.
What do you know that I don't?
Well, let's put it this way. Your marketing seems to be working very well.
I stand on the shoulders of giants. There are other people in the team who do all of the hard work. And yeah, that sounds like, oh, isn't he being modest? It's actually genuinely true.
Well, I think having a good team and good people around you is always the key to things like that. I'm sure we're going to be hearing from Tim as well a little bit about that. But Tim, tell us your story a little bit. You've kind of moved as well around in organizations you've set up and you've been involved with, and you told me that you were an entrepreneur in water from the age of 20-something, 27, I think you said. So all this moving about and shifting companies around, you know, can you not settle down?
Sure, Andrew. I mean, it is an interesting story, right? And I think those of us who are intrigued by pushing the envelope tend to keep pushing the envelope. And certainly when I was 29 and I thought I knew everything, sort of like peers, I've got this, we'll go start an engineering company because how hard can it be? You find out that it's a little harder than you thought it might be at the time. But here we are 20 plus years later, 100 employees across 5 offices in North America, specializing in technology for water utilities. And really out of that, we ended up coming up with some of those bright ideas. Because we're engineers, we always have bright ideas and we think that they'll live forever. And we recently actually just spun out our software platform that we built over the last 10 years. In fact, that deal just closed on June 30th of this year. So we've just walked right through a spin-off from an engineering company, building a software platform, which of course is totally different than engineering, and then spinning that out to another company. And we are still in the midst of another startup that we started at the end of 2018 for leak detection and pressure monitoring and distribution systems that we own a portion of, and are branding that and trying to get that ready to see where it'll take itself as well. So my story is I ran an engineering company until 2017, and in 2017 took 3 months off and traveled to a bunch of places with my family. Came back, took on the role of Chief Innovation Officer, which is really not as fun as Master of Chaos, which is on the website. But we needed some sort of title that I could sign things with. and really launched into those two product offerings. We had the software and the hardware with full force. And as you mentioned, Piers, a lot of that comes with having amazing people around that understand how to market and to link and separate at the same time. And we have learned how to do it and how not to do it in retrospect of spinning out our first one. And we're trying to avoid those mistakes with the second one in terms of making sure you're separated right from the start. That was probably our biggest lesson through all of this.
The entanglement.
Entanglement
in that case, yeah.
Yeah, entanglement is really hard to disentangle, to put it in front of a potential purchaser and explain to them that the Microsoft Excel financials I'm giving them are real. You know, as you pull it out of an engineering company and you sort of say, well, here's my two pieces. Trust me, I'm allocating everything properly.
Yeah.
So we learned that lesson and tried to fix that a year ago or so, and it seems to have paid off. So.
Now, Tim, in my introduction, I could have attempted to talk about all the different companies which you're involved with, but it's even too complicated for me to write down. So give us an indication, what's the name of the engineering company, what's the name of the spin-off, and what's the future name?
Sure. Yeah, so the engineering company is called Aramosa. It's easy to find, and the software spin-off was called Eris. And it does live on its own website and it was spun off to a company called Weston Technology Solutions out of Milwaukee. And then the third company is called Digital Water Solutions, which is the leak detection and pressure management for distribution systems.
I hope everyone's got that. I've recorded it, so we can probably send the links around then slightly afterwards. Excellent. So let's get to one, two more questions. Piers, from your perspective, we heard about the disentanglement issue, but why is it sometimes, maybe from a cultural perspective, why is it sometimes better to kind of cut the umbilical cord and take a great idea out of the previous organization?
So, so I obviously am biased, and you've got to understand the context that I spent the first 25 years of my career within corporates, desperately trying to get to the top, whatever the top might mean. You know, whether it was Thames Water or Atkins or Mooshell or whatever, I had the goal of trying to get to the top and stuck inside a corporate machine. And it was only when ISLE was separated, and yeah, I will never go back to being in a corporate. I just can't imagine a world where
anyone would take you.
Well, maybe where you're stuck in a world where decisions are, you know, the beauty of running a small business is you can make a decision at 10 to 9 on a Monday and you're implementing it by 9 o'clock. And you know what? By 10 o'clock, you probably have discovered whether it was a good idea or a bad idea. In most cases, you've started down the route. And if it was a bad idea, you've changed direction and you're already onto your next thing by 11 o'clock. In a corporate, you've got to persuade 1,000,001 people. You've got to work through all sorts of hidden agendas. You've got to persuade different budget holders. Now, you do get to play on a bigger stage. You do get to make more of an impact than you can perhaps make in a small company. But you lose a lot of control. Now, if you're developing a new idea and it's something that hasn't been done before, like the tag forum that we were trying, launching, you've got to be fleet of foot. You've got to be able to make some decisions, try some things, then fail, and you then adapt and move on. You've got to be prepared to sort of keep failing forwards. So I know it's a cheesy sort of Americanism of failing forwards, but it is absolutely true. You've got to embrace failure. You also have to be prepared to live with absolute fear. You know, running a small business, the number of nights I've lost sleep over, you know, can we make the payroll this month? And you transfer money from your personal savings into the business to try and just make sure it's going. Those first few years are absolutely terrifying. And it's a real test. When someone says, especially someone in a corporate who says, "Oh well, I'm a serial entrepreneur," and you know they've never lived that life of being on the edge of actually, you know, this is where you're putting your livelihood, your home, the security of your family at risk to try and pursue some idea which might or might not work. I can see Tim sort of nodding. I hope he's nodding and laughing with me rather than at me.
He can relate to it.
No, yeah, completely, Piers. I'm with you.
Yeah. So I think breaking the umbilical cord is it's terrifying, but it's also incredibly empowering. it's like a drug, actually. It's the sort of thing that once you get into it, you sort of embrace. I'm not saying I'll enjoy failure, but there is a bit where the peaks justify the troughs.
Now, Tim, we heard, of course, that, you know, in some larger corporations, at least, it's difficult to foster new ideas. You set up your own medium-sized corporation, at least, on a smaller scale, but you obviously also struggled to move into the digital world from that engineering base. So tell us a little bit about the cultural shocks and blockages which were there.
Sure, and engineers are used to billing hours. And so many of you might be familiar, you know, if you're a utility, you see an invoice from us that has X number of hours times X rate equals what you owe us. And software development doesn't work that way. We don't have people working by the hour that I can bill that to. We're building a platform and we're looking to sell licenses and have recurring fees associated with them. And so taking a mindset of billable hours versus product development, when everybody in the organization is used to working as an engineer in billable hours, becomes a very difficult way to approach your financials. And so we almost had to look at it with completely different metrics. That took some time to develop. What are appropriate metrics to evaluate that business on versus an engineering business? What is the appropriate way to carry out marketing activities? On the engineering side, the marketing activities are much more personal driven, relationship driven. On a product marketing cycle, we're looking for, you know, putting stuff out in front of people on a regular basis, a lot more digital marketing to the world. So just a very different approach in both how we invoice and how we track and measure the engineering versus how we track and measure progress on the product side of things. And when it was intertwined, before we were able to, as Pierce said, sort of separate them and break the umbilical cord, it was challenging to be able to actually get people to think about them in two different ways.
And that's also from the internal perspective, the team. Was there a bit of a clash there between, you know, people billing hours and people pushing products?
100%, right? When it was fully integrated as part of the engineering company, your shareholders are all looking at the results and trying to ask very pointed questions about the software side of the business. And are they really losing that much money, or are they really making that much money? And how can you prove that to me?
I can imagine the shareholders had a set of KPIs that they were used to measuring, and suddenly the model was all going wrong. All the KPIs that they thought they were using to work out whether the business was working fine had just gone Diwali.
But it probably wasn't the KPIs which were wrong. They were still, you know, forcing those KPIs on the business.
Absolutely, absolutely. I can imagine that being the case.
So I'll give you the prime example, Pierce. So we are our lead architect, right? So somebody who's overseeing the vision, you know, driving our development team, all of that. And I would go into meetings, they say, how come the lead architect isn't fully utilized? And I'm like, well, the fact he's utilized at all is amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, those KPIs around utilization and that engineering companies use just completely fall off when you start trying to look at software development and product development. Totally different mindset.
Which of course it is understandable, because the shareholders invested in a business that was what they bought, what they invested on the day they invested. They didn't know that you were still on a journey of fiddling around with it and evolving it into something. I bought a dinosaur, you've turned it into a monkey. What happened?
Yeah, and it's fine until it's six figures every year that they're investing. You know, and then that becomes a little more challenging to explain. So, you know, and that's part of it. One of the things you do need to do if you're going to go down this path is reach an agreement with your board and your team as to what an appropriate investment level is into these innovative ideas. We walk along some of the mantras of the 20-mile march and bullets before cannonballs and that. From good to great and books like that. And we certainly missed the bullets to cannonballs with this first innovation. We just went cannonball. And so we learned a lot along the way. And in retrospect, we wish we had done a few more bullets before we cannonballed. But it's turned out really well. The platform's in use at over 85 municipalities in North America.
Okay.
More than 30% of the Canadian population lives in municipalities that use the software. And it was time for, we started talking to people over the last couple of years, and it was time to find a home for that platform where it could be developed as a software platform by a company that understood software development. So we're thrilled to see it go there, and we're looking forward to seeing how it grows over the next number of years. A little bit like you, Pierce. I mean, I will love it if it succeeds greatly. I would be thrilled to watch it succeed greatly in its new home. We got it to where we could, and I'm really glad it's got a new home now where they're going to drive it forward.
Well, it's like your children, isn't it? You invested so much love and energy and everything into them. You kind of want them to flee the nest. You haven't succeeded as a parent if your children are still living with you when they're sort of 35. I apologize to anyone who's on this call and is 35 and living with their parents. But if your children are still living with you when they should have flown the nest, you've done something wrong as a parent. There is something about that with a business idea too. At some stage, it outgrows you. It needs to move, or you need to move on to something different.
I
totally agree.
Very soon, Pierce.
Well, I got to admit, Andrew, my dad was an engineer, ran a CEO of an engineering company in Canada here, originally from England, and two comments that always stick with me when I was sort of 27, 28, kicking around the idea of starting an engineering company. He's like, are we going to stop talking about this and just do it? Or are you going to keep talking about it?
Wow, that is such good fatherly advice.
It was. So we did, right? We just did it.
Thanks, Dad.
Yeah, thanks, Dad. So that was appropriate. But the one that stuck with me about getting out of the nest is when he dropped me off at university at 17. He said, well, son, we've really enjoyed raising you. You're welcome to come home in the summers and for 2 weeks after you graduate. All right. So I know where I stand. But yeah, I mean, part to your point there, Piers, you think of these innovations as children and you're raising them up to be out of the nest at some point, and it's great to see them take off and grow their own wings and succeed.
Now, those children, getting onto branding a little bit, those children, of course, still have an identity and they've got a heritage and they've come from somewhere. But in both your cases, you chose really not to really use the founding ideas apart from your own personal DNA, perhaps. But, your digital water doesn't have anything to do with Eramosa from a branding perspective, from the story. Isle Utilities, you have a story behind it, and there's a reason why it's called that. And I bet that 80% of the people who were confronted with Isle and know Isle don't know that story. So firstly, Tim, why didn't you, what were the reasoning for not really capitalizing on that? Or was it better not to do so because of the cultural clash, which we talked about?
Sure. There are a couple of reasons we did that. One is culture, obviously. You're dealing with different people and different mindsets. But more importantly to us was we really started them thinking that they would be standalone one day. So the people in our industry that are local to us, where we would be able to do pilots and put them in to show trials and that, would already know the linkage because we've got 30-year relationships with them. But for those who didn't know the linkage, we wanted these to be standalone solutions so that long-term they could leave the nest completely or become part of a larger organization. So we intentionally set them up to be branded independently. And the second one in particular, digital water, we learned that from the ERIS experience. We use tags like ERIS by Eramosa, or we'd put powered by Eramosa. And in hindsight, I wish we hadn't done that. Because it did lead to some problems with other engineering companies who really liked the product but didn't want to use it because it was our product. Competitors and that. So I think we might have had a little more success had we made that break with ERIS sooner. And as a result, we chose to make that break with digital water right up front. So.
And Pierce as well, despite you not really telling the story and Isle Utilities and everything behind that, you're extremely successful as well from a branding perspective. I can understand that you didn't want to have Atkins perhaps behind it, and because of the things you talked about in the introduction. But talk about the branding and the idea for moving beyond just keeping that Project Isle element. How did you develop the brand from there?
So, so there is apologies if I've been distracted. As I said at the beginning, I'm in a hotel car park in actually you can see if I just turn here, just here is Smoker's Corner, which I didn't realize. And as we started this, a bunch of people turned up with their cigarettes and beers because it's a pub pub hotel. And for the first part of this, they've been sitting there gazing across at me and they've just left.
You're acting very innocent.
I'm up in Hull with my nasty nasal southern accent. So, you know, it wouldn't be, yeah, I'm probably going to get glassed before the evening's out. Anyway, your question was around
brand
culture and brand. So if I can just tell a little diversionary anecdote. So we formed ISLE in 2010, and basically I then spent the next 5 years working in Thames Water, initially as a contractor, as an ISLE employee working for Thames Water. Then I became a full-time employee of Thames Water, and ISLE gradually grew, and it was this very family-run business. It wasn't really about making money. It was more about trying to make an impact and have a small band of people trying to do something good in an industry that's not very adept at being innovative. Then 2015, I was still caught in this thing of I'm going to be a big corporate person, and I was invited to join Blackstone, the world's most successful private equity fund. They were launching a new multi-billion-dollar water fund, and I was invited to be the first managing director. Now that sounds terribly grand, but a public private equity fund, we had 4 managing directors, so yeah. I still can claim I was the first of this failed fund that after 4 years didn't invest a single penny in a single asset. And I joined Blackstone. I actually only stayed there for just under 9 months because 6 months in, I had a sort of hissy fit and resigned. And in response to my hissy fit, they made me work with my last 3 months' notice, which, bearing in mind I'd become a terrorist, was a slightly strange thing, but it's Blackstone, they made some strange decisions. Now, that was a pivotal point for me because I was 45. I lost it with being in a big corporate, and I'd lost it because I was in an organization that claimed to have a set of values and beliefs that were a million miles away from how they actually behaved. And in the ISLE journey, I think that's the point when I decided I wanted ISLE to be a values-led business. I wanted it to be true to what it is. And we don't get it right. Of course we don't get it right. No organization gets it right, but we do strive to sort of hold to some principles of what we're doing. And yes, we need to make money. We need to be a profitable business. Otherwise we don't survive. But I hope that ISLE staff recognize that we're on a broader mission around trying to stimulate innovation in a sector that isn't particularly good at innovation. We're trying to bring new ideas forward, and it's about how we do business rather than what we do. I really hope that there is an ISLE way that we do things, which it comes across, I hope, as genuine. It comes across as, you know, filled with integrity. Forgiveness is a great word, I think, that I love people to think of when they think of ISLE. You know, we try things, we fail, and we celebrate that failure. We don't try and blame people. We look to do different types of things. And I probably wouldn't have been so passionate about that. And I get that some people will be looking at it going, oh, we're a bunch of cheesy rubbish. But actually, that I wouldn't feel so passionate about that if I hadn't had to go through the awful experience of working for my previous employers, which sort of took me to the dark side before I saw the light.
That's a very luxurious position as well to be in, to be able to let an idea germinate, also let other people take on that idea for their own purpose and help foster that along. And you know, I'm able to interact, fortunately, with a lot of your colleagues and staff, and you do attract.
Yeah, they have actually said, can you tell Andrew to stop ringing me? And by the way, Tim, I suspect that story about your father, I love it. I suspect that one day you're going to thank him, probably in the middle of the night with a meat cleaver when he's least expecting it. But I'm sure you'll thank him for that love and support that he showed you at that critical time in your life.
Yep, I'm sure I will.
Here's me trying to say what a particular nice bunch of guys you've got within ISLE, the guys and girls in ISLE.
Very good of you to say so.
There you go. No, seriously. You have a certain culture there, which is very encouraging to see. Now, one thing I would like to do is to bring on Mr. Freyberg if he's available, because he had a question to you as well, which I thought was a very good one. Tom, are you asleep?
I'm here. Can you hear me, guys? So I was asleep, and then I heard Piers talk about being glassed, and it suddenly woke me up. So hopefully that won't happen. But Yeah, really amazing discussion, guys. I just want a couple of questions, so different angles. But one is, I guess, kind of what Andrew just said. You both built epic teams, really talented individuals. So what advice would you give to companies kind of on that journey, really of accelerated growth? And how do you kind of find like-minded people? And Piers, you've talked about kind of failure and not having the fear to failure. You must have perhaps employed some bad apples in your time to find the field of good apples you now have. I mean, what advice would you give to companies listening about finding like-minded people to come with you on that journey?
So so sorry, Tim, do you mind if I jump in first?
Go ahead.
I think the key to this is knowing what you're bad at. Everybody knows what they're good at, and we all think that we're good at more things than we actually are. The most important thing is knowing what you're bad at. And one of the first things I learned that I was bad at is interviewing. So I don't do interviews inside Isle. I very rarely, because what happens, I meet someone, I get terribly excited, and I tell them the story about Isle, and I tell them, and I get really with it, and they get quite excited too, and then that feeds to my enthusiasm. And guess what? We finished the meeting thinking, God, this is marvelous. And I've basically spoken for probably 90% of the time. And it's just ridiculous. Yeah, that's not a good way to employ people. So other people, the best way to get a good team is, in my case, is to get people who are better skilled at looking for what's required to fit into the team. And that did take quite a lot of time to do it. As a sort of more broader comment, I do think you've got to have enough money to be able to give people, you've got to have enough strength in your balance sheet, which usually translates into money, to be able to take someone on and give them a long enough runway to prove themselves. There's no point in taking someone on 100 grand a year when you've only got 25 grand to do it and expecting them to be able to cover their own costs within 3 months, because it's just not going to happen. If you're going to take someone on for 100 grand and they're going to develop something new, you probably need 200 grand on the balance sheet so that you've given them a 2-year runway to be able to prove themselves. Now, if they're rubbish, you'll probably know that within 6 months. So you won't spend 200,000. You'll probably spend 50,000, but that's going to be the gamble you're taking. But just do not make a commitment to someone when you just can't. It's like driving a car and trying to get to a destination and not put enough fuel in the tank. You'll get there, but it'll all go wrong and it'll end in tears. So I think, as a practical bit of guidance, make sure you've got realistic timelines around what you do, and that's part of the reason why we refinanced the business, was to get enough strength in our balance sheet for us to be able to take on people and give them enough runway to do what they need to do. In particular, in consulting's got a lot of sales.
Tim, your perspective?
Don't be afraid to hire people that are better than you, almost, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's great. No, forget what I just said. I want that one. I want that. Can we edit it so that I say no? Thank you for that question, Andrew. The most important thing, I think, is to employ people who are better than you. That's what I think. No, Tim, what do you think?
I couldn't agree with you more on that one, because really realistically, we all have a lot of shortcomings, and if we spend forever trying to fix our shortcomings as opposed to hiring people who are much better at those already, we'll spend a lot of wasted time. So I'm all for hiring people to fill in your shortcomings and surround yourself with really great people to make things go faster. Our whole approach is generally find a really good person, bring them on, and figure out how they fit within the organization. We're less about, if I meet a perfect person that I think, man, this person's going to really help drive business or drive the organization forward or bring new ideas in, I would rather get them in, even if it takes us a while to figure out exactly where they fit. So, we would prefer to have the right people and then figure out their seats. Where do you sit? Okay, we'll get you into that seat. And we're not afraid to try to move them around. Sometimes you put people in seats that are the wrong seat, and yet they're amazing people. So move them back to a different seat. There's no point in wasting that talent in the wrong location within the organization as well.
It's a very interesting perspective, which really throws sort of organizational theory completely on its head. Never develop your org chart around the people you have. It should be the other way around. So that's really interesting to hear.
And someone once told me, I'm not really big into football. Someone once said, if you've got a football team, you've got a brilliant goalie, the last thing you say to the goalie is, well, I know you're a good goalie, but I want you to be striker. And you put them in the forward. You play people to their strengths, which actually does come back to knowing what their weaknesses are, because you don't put people in. And often you see in corporates, they'll promote people up to a sort of level of incompetence, and you get stuck. In big corporates, you can get people who get stuck at a certain level where they're not really performing well enough to get promoted up any further, but not quite shit enough to get to get sacked, and they
No more
just
names
stay
for
at
us,
this
Piers?
level.
Andrew, you don't want to do that much editing at the end of it, do you?
That's true. Tom, you had a fabulous question as well.
Can I just jump
please,
in
Tim.
before you ask? So one of the other things about innovation in particular is you actually don't want an organization full of people exactly like you anyway, because you need people to poke and prod and ask questions and challenge decisions and get the best out of the team, as opposed to everybody just nodding their heads and saying, oh, Tim and Piers are great, we're just going to follow along what they want to do. That doesn't always lead to the best solution at the end of the day or the best innovation within an organization. So I would also encourage people not to
Don't you have blind allegiance inside your organization?
Well, I would like to think I do, but I think if you ask them directly, I might not. So, but I think having those people to ask and poke and prod has made a huge difference for us in terms of keeping us moving forward.
Well, that touches on a question, if I may, Tom, that Natasha has asked actually in the chat, and that is about diversity. She mentions gender diversity and sees that a lot within ISLE. The UK water industry has a poor record on gender diversity. Let's broaden that a little bit to the diversity you want, Tim, in your team, whether it be gender or different cultural backgrounds. How does that work, and how do you put it together for the larger purpose of where you want to go with Project ISLE?
Yeah, fair question. I mean, diversity is always an issue, and we struggle with it a lot in the engineering business. I would say that one of our biggest challenges is the number of applicants we even receive from a gender diversity perspective is predominantly male still. And, we would love to overcome that and get more applicants, that are female. In terms of race and background in that, we have less challenges with that. We're fortunate we're close to Toronto, and it's a very multicultural environment. And so we actually have a lot of applicants who have come from other places. Some of our shareholders grew up in Iran. We have people from India and Pakistan and that on our team who have immigrated to Canada. That has been great because they work differently than we work as well. They have a different approach to work. They've also seen different things, as much as we like to think of the water business as being homogenous. Different countries approach things differently. They have different challenges, and it's good to get that into the organization. If we had a bunch of people who all came from Ontario, where we have plentiful water, and that, we would be way less innovative than if we bring in people from areas that have scarcity around water or have challenges with wastewater treatment and that in their areas. So we welcome it. It's not always easy to get it, I'll be honest.
Piers, you certainly have more diversity, at least gender diversity, I think, in ISLE compared to most of the UK water industry that I've experienced. Is that by design, and how does that help you in your innovative thinking?
So it's not quite by design, although it does go back to the comment made earlier around people. We generally employ people who look a bit like ourselves. Now that, if you can get, when you're a small team, if you can get a small diversity, and guess what will happen? As it grows, those employees will grow more of a diverse team. If your first 3 employees all happen to be white middle-aged blokes, then it's likely the next 3 employees will be white middle-aged blokes. If the first 3 employees are of different genders, then different diversities, then that will cascade down. I do think that so we are, the last time we ran the actual official figures, I think we were 52% female, 48% male. When the hashtag #MeToo movement sort of came alive a couple of years ago, we did run a assessment on our pay. I had this horrible sense, oh my God, what we'll discover is we find that we're paying less to women in particular. And actually what we found was that we are organizationally blind to people's gender, to their skin color, to their religious belief. We employ, I think it's 28 different nationalities. We speak 34 languages, but that's a reflection of the fact that we are operating in lots of different countries. We are still far from perfect. So with the Black Lives Matter movement, and in particular, that struck a chord very deeply with our US colleagues, because it's been so at the forefront of the US sort of political debate. We've looked at that, and yes, we have a huge number of non-whites or people of color inside ISLE, but we actually only, out of the sort of 90 or so staff, we only have 2 people who are African American. And that doesn't feel like the right representation. And I find myself going, well, how did that happen? How did we not, we're active in South Africa, we're active across North America, we're active across Africa. How have we not got that representation right? So there's still quite a lot that we've got to do to represent. I think what you're looking for is for the organization to represent the communities they serve. It would be crazy to say, we had if we had 100% coloured workforce and we were in, I don't know, Stockholm, there'd be something sort of a bit skewy there. You want to have the organisation being of a very similar diversity to the communities they serve, and I don't think we're quite there yet in Ireland. Okay, we're good, but we're not. We've still got some way to go.
Tom, over to you again.
Yeah, I'll just apologise for the background noise. I've taken out a lease on a co-working space, and it seems that Thursday at 4 o'clock they start the nightclub music. So may have to review the contract on that one. But it was just a question that I had on maintaining focus, because no doubt you have to put everything into the business. Piers, you've talked about the sleepless nights and kind of having to pull my personal finances over. But how do you kind of maintain focus when you're growing and you've got lots of different opportunities, lots of different partnerships, and you kind of that drug of being the entrepreneur hits your system, like you say? How do you kind of just maintain the focus to kind of keep with that mission? That's kind of what I want to hear from you guys is when things are going well and you've hired some great recruits and the money's there, how can you maintain that kind of laser track vision?
You want me to go first, Piers?
You go first. I'm really going quiet because I've jumped in too many times. You go first.
Yeah, why don't I go first? I mean, from our perspective, you're trying to run 3 different organizations, right? So the way we handled it is before I took on running 2, I did hand over the day-to-day operations and the presidency of the engineering company. So I just am acting as chair of the board there now, which certainly hands over the control for the direction of the day-to-day and marketing and running and keeping the people going to an individual who can be laser focused on that, which has been very intentional so that the engineering side didn't fall off while we were heading down these other paths. Same with our software platform. We had a product manager and vice president in place early on, probably within a couple of years of getting it going, to really drive that and be the person with the laser focus. That certainly helped. So I think you can't expect to control everything. Surrounding yourself with good people gives you that ability to also hand off control, but stay informed, right? So we've taken the approach that you need somebody who's going to have that laser focus, who's going to be ultimately responsible, but that you can sort of tap on the shoulder and say, hey, have you thought about this? And they'll actually stop and think about it rather than just keep going blindly. But that's how we did it. We actually made sure we had individuals who were ultimately responsible for each of the organizations running them.
So my life is so much easier than Tim's because I only run one company. He doesn't run 2, he runs 3. But I think the difference there is that just get out there and do it. I'm talking about this for years, can't get on with it. There's 2 and 3. The answer to how do you cope in my circumstance, I don't. You look back and you see it. You see the moments when you didn't manage it properly. I wish there was a better answer than that, but the truth of the matter is you try and prioritize things, but often it's the loudest voice or the most pressing problem that you deal with right now, and it might not be the most important strategic one, and you might not have the foresight to take a breath and see that it's the problem. I think as I've got older, I've realized that there are moments when I'm not coping with things, and I know that I go to. So I'm not generally a person who delves into detail. I trust other people to do detail. I like to stay at a sort of more higher level picture. And actually, when I'm in stress, I will find myself deliberately drilling down into levels of detail that I'm not happy with, that I wouldn't normally go to. And it's a slightly odd moment. I'm able to, when I'm deep in detail, I know that actually something's probably gone wrong. There's something falling apart because I'm using that as a crux to rush to. But the short answer is I don't know how you deal with it because I haven't mastered it yet. Sorry.
Well, excellent points for all of us to learn from that, and we hope we can pass on some of this knowledge. We've probably got time for just one or two more questions, although a few people will be dropping off. But before we go there, let me just do a plug for a couple of further sessions coming up. On the 30th of July, we have the Scroll Stoppers. Very interested as well to get to know Sarah Walker-Smith, who's a lawyer, but very active in social media, and John Gonzalez from East Ohio Sewerage Systems, I think, Tom, something like that, is also on the Twitter space at the moment. If you're looking into a water utility, I think the very most interesting channel you could tune into. Some quite incredible stuff there. So the Scroll Stoppers is coming up in 2 weeks' time, and then 2 weeks after that, we have LG Sonic, a very successful company, which has launched a number of new products in the Netherlands and worldwide. Coming on with Lisa Brand, and she'll be talking about how to launch a product successfully. Before going into September, we're going to be talking about the new landscape of events. Have Annette Boss, the boss of Aquatech, coming on board together with Milena Jordanova, who's from DuPont, talking about how to use events now we can't meet physically so much. So there's some quite interesting inspirations coming up there. Tom, do you have another question or two? And I'm going to look into our chat one more time.
No, I think just congrats to you guys. Really interesting discussion. I know, Andrew, you're a bit worried about maybe controlling our panelists today, but I think they've been relatively well behaved. So thank you guys. Been really, really engaging discussion so far.
It has indeed. So let's sign off at that stage on a high note. Tim, thank you very, very much for joining us in your morning and taking the time to share your experiences. The best of luck with Digital Water Solutions. You've shared the website in the chat, so that's good for people to have a good look at. And Piers, great thanks for tuning in from the pub in Hull. And we'll let you get on with the rest of your day. Thank you so much, everyone, and we'll speak soon.
Great. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
All the best.
You guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.